Hello, welcome to part 3 of the 3 things you must know to get every child reading. In part 1, we had a look at data and the things that you need to be collecting data about in order to make sure that your children are on track in their reading development. Part 2 explored the evidence and what the evidence tells us. In this third part, we're going to have a look at some of the specific strategies that you can use in your classroom to maximize student achievement. You need to be getting bang for your buck in terms of your teaching time. You owe it to yourself and your students to make sure that you're not messing around with ineffective strategies and ineffective activities that are not contributing to your children's development. Let's have a look. Number 1, here's the biggie. Teaching needs to be explicit. Now, that doesn't mean boring. It doesn't mean that children never get to talk to each other or have any hands-on work. It simply means that teachers need to be clear about what it is they're teaching and take children through a process, a gradual release of responsibility model, all the way from building the field to reflection at the end. Inquiry learning, discovery learning, child-centered teaching, all of those things require the child to draw on background knowledge that they may or may not have to construct learning for themselves. And the research is really clear. This is not an effective way to teach for most children. It exacerbates disadvantage for children who do not have that bucket of background knowledge that they need to draw on to be able to make connections and put learning together for themselves. Explicit teaching needs to happen in the fundamental areas of the entire curriculum to be really effective. We'd be hard-pressed to find a primary school classroom that wasn't full of books of all descriptions: fiction, non-fiction, picture books, chapter books, decodable text, hopefully. These books are used in a variety of ways, and I want to draw your attention to a way that you can use high-quality children's literature, particularly picture books. Because remember, I had said earlier that the average good quality children's picture book contains more complex language than an adult television show. So you can use these books as a springboard for language development, for writing, but also for reading comprehension. This goes way beyond just reflecting on the story and thinking about, is it fiction or non-fiction, and drawing a picture of your favorite part. It involves teaching grammar in context, which can be a very scary thing for many of us who were not taught grammar at school ourselves or throughout our university training. So using picture books to teach grammar is a really fantastic way to provide context-embedded learning about language for children. So I encourage you to have a look at books and the language that's in it, and have a look and see where you can use that language as a springboard to engage children in language activities to build grammar. When considering this third area of making sure that everything you do is aligned with achievement, you need to ask yourself the question, what am I hoping my students will get out of this activity? There is no place for busy work in your core curriculum part of the day. So everything you do with them needs to be aligned to one of those areas of the reading rope. When we're talking about reading, that means you need a high quality phonics program. And when I say program, it doesn't need to be a commercial purchased program, but your approach needs to be explicit. It needs to be cumulative, which means that it builds. It needs to be systematic, so you have an order of what you're teaching. You're not just teaching phoneme, grapheme, correspondence. You are actively teaching blending and segmenting, and children are engaging with words and literature in a meaningful way, but we're explicitly teaching the skills children need. That needs to happen every day for at least half an hour. And children need to be taught where they're up to. So some things can be taught whole class, such as your phonological and phonemic awareness. But when it comes to phonics, the learning needs to be targeted at the exact point where the children's learning sits, so that you know what to teach to build. This learning needs to be fast. We need to enable children to feel success and be able to use the phonics as soon as humanly possible. Otherwise, it becomes a drawn out, frustrating process for you and the students. Many Australian classrooms have sight word programs active. And in part 2 of this series, I talked about why that's not a great idea. Instead of having your teaching assistant sit with children, particularly the struggling children, and flash words at them for the child to learn as a global shape, which, as I've said, is not actually really a thing, this time would be much better spent practicing the phoneme grapheme correspondence and the word level blending. So outside of your regular lesson time, most classes have some sort of a quiet reading time. I encourage this to include decodable text for children who are able to or still need to access decodables. But children who are not yet ready to read at a text level can use that time to practice. So one model is you have a pencil case or a bag or some other vessel, and inside it are printouts of alphabet letters or graphemes that the child can sit and practice. Instead of them doing that by themselves and not really knowing whether they got it right or not, if you're lucky enough to have a parent helper or a teaching assistant, they can be going through those with the child. You could also do partner work if that will work in your context. Also in that pencil case or the bag are CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant words that have sounds in there that the children already know. So the child can practice the blending. You might have some kind of matching game where there's a picture that goes with each of those CVCs so that there's a meaningful activity that needs to happen. And that's the beginning of the reading comprehension with text. Children then in that time can be free to choose whatever book they like, spend time with whatever big Harry Potter, tree house, non-fiction book they want to. They're not going to be reading it, but that's okay because they need to build their identity as a reader. But use time wisely. Devote your sight word practice time to phoneme grapheme correspondence, and in your quiet reading time, just have a little bit of skills practice. First 10 minutes is sounds, words, decodable texts, and the rest of it is spend time with it, whatever book you like. I've seen this work really, really well. Kids love it. Teachers love it because they can reach every child, particularly the children who probably are not getting that extra practice at home. You can make sure that they're not left behind. I've mentioned decodable texts a few times now. And if you are fortunate enough to be in a school that has a good supply of decodables, then that is absolutely fantastic. But if you're not, if you are the one and only teacher in your cohort who really wants your children reading decodables, it can be tough because I'm going to have a guess that you don't have a couple of $1,000s to go and spend on a set of your own books. There are downloadable, reasonably priced decodable texts that you can find online. A to Z Reading comes to mind. They have decodable texts. You can also write your own short stories. I know that's very time consuming, but you can. And there are particular companies that have apps. So Decodable Readers Australia has an app that has their decodables on it. So for $25, you get a particular number of texts, and it's a much cheaper option than purchasing the books yourself. But I would say that if you're a beginning teacher, start to build up your collection of decodables that have that limited and constrained range of phonics choices in it. even if you're an upper primary teacher, because I guarantee you there will be children coming through your classroom who still need decodables. So, decodable texts until children are proficient readers to practice their reading skills. So you've reached the end of the third video. I'm so pleased. But where to from here? It's one thing to know the what of the evidence base. It's another thing to know the how. And it will take a lot longer than 30 minutes of video to fully tell you and show you how you can implement the evidence in your classroom. So your next steps from here can be, keep an eye on the blog, The No Nonsense Educator. I'm continually updating the content there. It's entirely free and I'd share as much as I can in that space. I'd also like to let you know about another opportunity for growth and learning, and that is my membership site, which is the Evergreen Teacher. This site is aimed at supporting teachers, not just with articles and blog posts, but with real-time live sessions. Everything from group coaching to live planning sessions where you walk away with your science planning or your HASS planning or your literacy planning completed. You don't have to struggle through trying to interpret the Australian curriculum, trying to keep an eye on a rubric, trying to understand your children on your own. There is a whole community of people there to help you, and the membership site, the Evergreen Teacher, is about supporting you to be continually building your own skills in teaching and your knowledge of how to do that reasonably quickly and effectively so that you can maximize results for yourself and for your students.